There's something about Olympus's E-M10 and all its marks that makes me smile. It has the cheeky charm of a puppy. It has always been one of my favourite Micro Four Thirds cameras because while tiny in measurement, it feels and handles bigly, if you will. If this was the only camera you'd ever used, you were just thinking about the size a properly designed camera would need to be and not give it another thought. This Mark IV version feels and looks little different to the Mark III, but there are two major differences. The first major difference is that the sensor is now the same 20 megapixel item as found in the Olympus E-M5 Mark II, E-M1 Mark III and E-M1X. The second is that the monitor now reverses under the camera, so that narcissists visiting Pompeii no longer have to suffer the boredom of looking at all those dreary Roman remains. You could use it for blogging too, so you could not only pout to camera, but hear yourself telling yourself how totally awesome you are, Jude. You'll need the camera's built-in mic to do it though, there's no mic input. Physically, the 4, 3 and 2 are within a few millimetres in size and a few grams of one another in weight. There are all sorts of incremental improvements to autofocus performance and battery life, up from 330 to 360 shots for example, and sequential shooting speed up a bit, but nothing you'd really notice going from one to the other. Construction, like the 3, is mainly plastic, and doesn't feel to my hands as solid as the 5-year-old Mark II, but that's an old argument now and possibly subjective. By any standards, the E-M10 Mark IV is a rather beautiful example of modern consumer design, and to my eyes the best looking Micro Four Thirds camera of all. Up and running, the camera behaves as you'd hope it would. The controls all fall to hand in logical positions, and the grip in particular is very comfortable. Small or large hands, this will feel comfortable and right. There are aperture, shutter, manual and movie modes for experienced shooters, and a raft of scene settings to help newbies, plus art settings for special effects, and the superb AEP position, which groups all the advanced settings like high dynamic range and panorama together. The shortcut button gives immediate access to the super control panel, which puts all the salient adjustments in one place, but also in the other modes like AP or art, unfolds all the possibilities with the ease of opening a book. Olympus often gets kicked for the complexity of its menu systems, but its shortcut button and special menus are a model of their type. Everything operates smoothly and the buttons are precise. The EVF is good, smaller than the M1 Mark III, but bigger than the Panasonic GX9, and in its own right plenty big enough. The whole camera is a joy to use, something I don't say easily. One thing missing though is a My Menu, customizable menu section. It's a niggardly omission and one I suggest Olympus correct in a firmware update. Equally niggardly on such a recent camera is a mini USB connector rather than the C-type, though at last you can charge the battery in situ. While the E-M10 Mark IV is regarded as an entry-level model, no one appears to have told the camera that. If you look at its performance, for the vast majority of work which doesn't involve high-speed indoor sports shooting, its output is as good as any Micro Four Thirds camera from either maker. The stabilisation is improved from 4 to 4.5 stops, they say. Impossible to verify, but I happily handhold my Nikon 300 with it, so it performs as well as I need. The continuous AF is contrast-based rather than phase detection of its bigger siblings, so it isn't the very best, but it does seem better than past E-M10 models. Technology has spoiled us, and we expect high-speed sequences to turn out 95% pin sharp these days. This little Olympus can't reliably match that. If you have a higher requirement, you shouldn't be looking at cameras at this price point. The tracking AF mode seems pretty solid too. On image quality, the 20 megapixel sensor IQ is now the same as on all the main Micro Four Thirds models from both Olympus and Panasonic, and Olympus's JPEG output is as pleasing as ever. Incidentally, I bought this camera with the 14 to 42mm f3.5 to 5.6 power zoom and folding lens. I had one before but found it rather soft. This one seems much better, certainly as sharp as any rivals, if not a match for the 12 to 40 Pro zoom. If you have a Mark III E-M10, is it worth upgrading? I say not. This 4 is definitely an all-round improvement on the 3, but nothing game-changing. The 20 megapixel sensor is good to have. Before it makes a material difference, you need to be making large prints over 20 inches or so. And the extra 600 pixel width of the Mark IV will give you an extra 2 or 3 inches over that at maximum print quality. You could crop a little more, of course. I make no argument against the 20 megapixel sensor, there's no downside to it. If you had the E-M10 Mark II, again I'd say stay with it. The Mark IV does have 4K video at 24, 25 and 30 frames per second, better range of video choices, but I doubt that much of the M10's market is video orientated. Looked at standalone, this is a very attractive camera. The resculpted grip is comfortable to hold, the SCP puts everything important immediately to hand via the dedicated button, and used with aperture or shutter priority or on manual, it will satisfy any experienced photographer. The AP setting, while simplifying access to the advanced photo settings for beginners, is just as useful for hypo-hardened old grizzlies like me to both access and remind you of the facilities on offer. I'd like to see this on the M1, for example, to give convenient access to high-res and live ND and other exotic baubles. So, just another E-M10? No, where I wouldn't have considered going from the Mark II to the Mark III. From the Mark II to the Mark IV I would. It offers improvement enough to offset my prejudice against plastic-bodied cameras and moves the IV up a notch. It was once a teenager, now it's a young adult. Thanks for watching.